Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anup Gupta from Microsoft Research. We have a very interesting talk today by Dr. Kiran Martin on inclusive cities transforming the lives of Delhi's urban poor. As most of us know, the migration to urban cities to cities is becoming a huge issue between 2000 and 2030. The population is expected to double to around 5 billion people. Approximately a third of these people, around 1.6 billion, will be in slums. And how we address these problems are really, really important to take care of. In fact, in 2012, there were around 863 million people who were living in slums worldwide. I am myself from Delhi, so it is, something that we deeply care about. In fact, when our family visited Delhi just this last December, we took a tour of the slums with Salam Balak Trust folks to get a deeper understanding, because I think it's a problem for all of us to think about and help solve. Now, while some of us, and I'm mostly talking about people like myself, look at the problem and think about the statistics, there are a few amongst us who are really doing actually something about the problem on the ground and making a real difference. And that is really, people like our speaker, Dr. Kiran Martin. Now, Dr. Kiran Martin is a social entrepreneur and the founder and director of the Asha Community Health and Development Society. It was founded in 1988 when there was a cholera outbreak in one of the Delhi slums. And now, more than 25 years later, she has brought dramatic change to roughly 500,000 people in the slums of Delhi. And today we'll hear about her story, the actions, and how with perseverance she has gone and addressed these major challenges from dealing with health and financial inclusion and empowering the citizens of these slums. So, she was also awarded in 2002 the Padma Shri Award, which is the highest civilian honor in India by our president, R.K. Narayan, at that particular point in time. She's spoken in lots of places, so it's a real honor to have her here. So before I just hand the mic to her, a couple of quick points. If you're watching this on ResNet remotely, welcome to the talk. You will also see there is a button on things, so you can ask questions. I will be monitoring that throughout the talk, and I can repeat the questions to her. One of the things that one of you already asked was about how can you, this is the month of giving campaign at Microsoft, how can you contribute to Asha? So if you go to the giving campaign site, Give Now, and search for Asha India in all capital letters, you will find the site to go and give, and please contribute. So with that, let me welcome Dr. Kiran Martin to share her thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anup. Thank you. It's a real pleasure being here. I'm a pediatrician, and I went to Maulana Azad Medical College in the University of Delhi, and like Anup said, I started Asha in the year 1988. This is a picture of affluent Delhi. We know that it is one of the most affluent cities in the country. It has the highest per capita income, and no, I have my own mic. and you won't be able to hear my mic because the microphone is only for the purposes of recording. I've already been told that. So, so now this of course is a typical slum in the city of Delhi, and as you can see, it's primarily made up of discarded material, pieces of cardboard, anything heavy that can hold the roof together. And this is actually representative of slums in all the major cities in India and many towns in India, and in fact developing countries the world over. We are expecting half the world's population to start living in cities by 2050. The issue of slum development and urban poverty is something that the Millennium Development Goals have also recognized, and one of the MDGs clearly states a target of 100 million slum dwellers that they hope to be able to reach out to for the alleviation of poverty in these communities. I also wanted to just say here that you would be surprised that the annual slum growth rate is the highest in South Asia. It's about 3%, which is a very high figure. And 20% of the whole world's slum dwellers reside in India. So India becomes a very important country to address the problems of people living in such kind of urban poverty. Just to show you how people in slums can live in very dangerous situations. The slum is right there by a railway track, and trains are passing by every few minutes. They could also be by the side of dirty drains. They could also be located next to five-star hotels. It's very common to see a slum from the window of a room in your five-star hotel. And there is no access to water and sanitation, and there's a lot of filth and dirt and garbage everywhere around. Lots of pigs as well, huge rats running across the floor. And people, there's a clothesline hanging from one end of the house to the other with pots and pans everywhere. So everything happens in that little slum hut, the cooking, the cleaning, the sleeping, everything. Just to show you a little bit of what an inside street of a slum can look like, it's really not a place fit for human habitation. And these are some of the worst slums. I've seen slums in Nairobi, I've seen them in Addis Ababa, I've seen them in Brazil, I've seen them in Argentina, I've gone to lots of different countries. I've also seen them in Thailand. But I do have to say that some of the slums in North India, particularly Delhi and Kolkata, are among the absolute worst in the whole world. Kids in slums grow up with severe malnutrition because of the inflation. I mean, they come here from the villages in search of work, but when they come to the cities and they come and start living in these shanty colonies, the burden of disease is so great that a lot of their disposable income is spent on battling illness. The infant mortality rate in Delhi slums is among the highest in the whole world. It's 100 for every 1,000 live births. The child mortality rate is 146. That is also one of the highest in the whole world. And the infant mortality rate for India as a whole is 66, which is still extremely high if you look at the table of countries all over the world. It's about 7, I think, in the United States. The maternal mortality is also shockingly high in slums. It's about 900 for every 100,000 live births, which is again among the highest in the whole world. So essentially, all of the health parameters and human development indicators are far worse in urban poor communities than they are in rural communities. And these are UNICEF documented figures, and today all world bodies recognize that urban poverty in many ways is much worse because as far as health goes, as far as education goes, as far as water goes, sanitation goes, things like land rights, all of these problems are far greatly experienced and exacerbated in slum communities as opposed to villages. And then to compound the big problem, you have the presence of slumlords and you have the presence of the mafia. And I guess this picture is quite clear, right? I mean, it tells you who the slumlord is and also, all the other people who help him in his work and his activities. So India, of course, is a democracy and not a democracy, because in large sections of the population of our country, democracy doesn't really work. and slums is typical. So you have large numbers of people, maybe ranging from 5,000 to 50,000 in these kinds of communities, where slum lords are the people who are self-styled. They basically control the state of affairs in these communities. They determine which party that whole community is going to vote for. The power of exercising franchise does not lie with the slum dwellers themselves. And so this environment of tremendous exploitation and tremendous oppression results in a sense of fatalism. It results in a sense of apathy. It results in a suspicion because they've lived at the bottom of the ladder for so long, and that the meaning of the word entitlement or the meaning of the word citizenship does not exist as far as they are concerned. And to top it, you also have the problem of various subcastes, unlike in a village where it's homogeneous and you have one caste, whereas in slums you have people migrating from all over the country, and they bring with them their own subcultures. There are social barriers, there are religious barriers, and so it's such a mixed and heterogeneous population, and there is such a huge scarcity of resources that the conflict then becomes an even bigger issue, because as it is, the resources are so scarce. And so it's an environment where you can immediately, when you walk in, you can experience a great deal of hostility, a great deal of alienation. You can literally sense the resentment. It's quite palpable. And also there you can sense the atmosphere of intimidation and fear, which is created by the presence of the slum lords and other elements in the communities who basically rule communities in a self-styled manner.
Is there also a sense of social support because everybody is so desperate and poor and things like that? So, there are complications, but is there a good side to being in a slum?
To some extent, you might find it among communities that are like one another.
Yeah.
So, for example, if there's a group of rickshaw pullers from Bihar and they all happen to be living in the same geographical location in the community, there might be some sense of community among them. Mm-hmm. But if you have them literally living neck to neck, all from different communities, then there's more alienation than a sense of togetherness or a desire to work together for the common good of the community. That's how it is in urban poor communities, unlike rural communities, where of course things are very different. Yes?
I don't want to distract things too much, but you mentioned the disenfranchisement, and I just wonder the mechanics of how a slumlord is able to force a population to vote in a certain way.
Yeah, so basically, since we are a democracy, all adults have a voting right, including slum dwellers. So, in a particular constituency of, say, a councillor or a legislator who's a local level, state level politician, you might have about 200,000 people living in that constituency, of which, if say there are 20,000 in a slum or 50,000 in a slum, then the votes of the slum dwellers become extremely important to that particular politician. So what they typically do is cultivate slumlords whom they will look after quite well in many different ways. So typically the slumlord's house will be much bigger and nicer than all the little shacks around. So they would take care of them financially, they would give them lots of other benefits, and also just that sense of power by virtue of being a political party worker and having access to the political nexus makes the slumlord feel extremely important. And in return they expect the slumlord to make sure that the entire population votes for that party that has taken care of the slumlord. And he basically does it through intimidation. And sometimes they also have this thing about distributing some alcohol or a little bit of money just on the eve of the election, 2 or 3 days before the election. And somehow then people are propelled into this whole thing of going and following the slumlord. Because they have never ever, rather before Asha's work, I'm saying, they had never understood the power of their franchise ever. They had been so marginalized and they had been so accustomed to being ruled that there was a sense of tremendous passivity and fatalism that existed in the minds of people living in these communities.
So my understanding was that there was a particularly strong emphasis on privacy in the poll sites using the Indian EVMs. But if the residents don't understand what they're doing and they're being told by the slumlord, even if there's no mechanical enforcement, if they're just doing what they're told,
Yes.
they'll realize that they can choose.
Yes, that's exactly the way it happens. So, I mean, essentially they have these huge trucks that stand outside the slum, and people are asked to sit in those trucks so that they can very easily take them to the polling booth, and that they don't have the incentive to have to walk and all that. And then they go there, and then of course they're in the peace and quiet of a polling booth where they can exercise their franchise, but they just do it according to what they've been told. And because they're so afraid and they need the slumlord, where else there's no other alternative system or structure that they can turn to. And they know that tomorrow if a policeman tries to frighten them and intimidate them, they'll go running to the slumlord. There's no one else they can go to. So it's a vicious cycle. So my work began when there was a cholera epidemic going on in the city, and I actually just started seeing patients out in the open. And from then I have evolved a whole lot of different programs in the slums to bring about transformation of these communities in order to be able to completely lift them out of poverty and for them to become middle class citizens. That's been the aim of the organization. And my healthcare programs look rather different from a conventional healthcare program. So the woman that you see here on your left is a community health volunteer. I have trained hundreds of such women who live in the slums and who might be either completely illiterate or they might be semi-literate. But they have been able to transform health in their communities by the training that they have received and by being available 24 hours and round the clock. Now, there is one thing to be noted here, and that is that urban community health volunteers are very different from rural community health volunteers. The concept of community health volunteers had been established many years ago in rural India, but not in urban India. Because urban community health volunteers, it was a very different story. They were from different castes and different religions, and also because the city offers you economic opportunities, it was hard to be able to recruit urban community health volunteers. So there were lots of different things that we learned, and ours was the first organization that ever trained urban community health volunteers in our country and then were able to demonstrate how successfully they can transform healthcare in their own communities in a highly cost-effective way. Now the government of India got extremely excited when they saw this model, because if they were able to see it in those days among 200,000 people, that was a fairly large number. So they then decided to replicate and to scale up this particular style of primary health care, and they also called their urban community health volunteers as Ashas, just after, so if you Google them, you'll see that they'll come up and then you'll know, the story behind it. But, and just talking about scaling up, you can scale up either by expansion, which we have done to some extent. So we are now looking after 500,000 slum dwellers, and you need to have a certain size so that governments don't say that these are not replicable programs and you're too small. But then the other way to scale up is by replication, and we decided that we would expand but to a certain limit, after which we would choose the route of replication, particularly because government has far more resources and far more infrastructure and to be able to do large scale replication of things that they get excited about. And so this is one example of how government of Delhi decided to replicate, and then of course it went to many different states in the country.
So for the 500,000, how many volunteers do you have? How do you train them? What kinds of thing does the community volunteer handle versus how does it escalate to a doctor? What happens?
So basically we've got a 3-tier system of healthcare. The very first tier is the community health volunteer, and she is responsible roughly for 200 to 300 families. So in a whole slum, depending on the population, the slum is divided up, and there is a community health volunteer for each segment, and she is responsible for that segment. And she is given training by Asha, both in curative care as well as in preventive and promotive health care. Now she of course has a set of responsibilities that she carries out, and those responsibilities are carried out with every single family in her segment. So she is accessible, and in all likelihood her segment is where she lives. Her house is probably going to be in that location. So she can treat common ailments such as diarrheal illness, such as respiratory infections, such as boils, skin infections, eye infections, ear infections, make sure children don't get dehydrated. She also knows how to examine pregnant women, and also detect high risk pregnancies. They can also give injections, they can take blood pressures, they can do all sorts of things. And it's remarkable the kind of healthcare that they are able to provide. And I've noticed that they have very highly developed communication skills, and they're actually sometimes much better communicators than a lot of our doctors are, and because they speak the same dialect and they speak the same language, and they're within the community, they're very effective communicators, and they've been able to convince large populations of the importance of family planning, for example. Yes.
So what is the typical educational background for one of these volunteers?
The community health volunteers could either be completely illiterate, or at best they might have gone up till class 6, 7 or 8, but not beyond class 8 generally is what we've seen, and those are a little bit on the rarer side. And we've evolved a method of training whereby someone who can't read and write can also be trained. And that of course is available for further discussion if you would like to know what our methods of training are.
So that's tier 1. What's tier 2?
Tier 2 is the Asha health centers in the different slum areas. So we've got 65 slums in which we are working. So we've got a center, and the community center is staffed by our like you can see over here, a visiting doctor and nurses and paramedics and so on. That's just the health part. I mean, of course, we've got lots of other things we do. And so most of our patients will be referred by the community health volunteers to the doctor, so that the doctors don't unnecessarily waste time in coughs and colds, when they should be seeing things like tuberculosis, or pneumonias, or typhoid, or hepatitis, or complicated diseases that really require the attention of a doctor. If we didn't have a community health volunteer, the doctor in 3 hours would be seeing, I mean, she would hardly get through to 25 or 30 patients, and she would be wasting a great deal of time, and her professional skills wouldn't be put to the best use at all. And then in the third tier, we have a referral system that we've established, because we don't have our own hospital. So we decided to use the existing services in the hospital so that we didn't get diverted from our goals of community development and upliftment of poverty into running a hospital. So we've got links with various hospitals in the city, both public and private, and our community health volunteers actually are the ones who act as advocates and as champions for the family. So whoever is sick in their segment of the community, because in a public hospital it's very hard. So the community health volunteers will accompany them and make sure that they see the doctor and get everything done. Now comes the whole strand of women's empowerment, which is possibly one of the most challenging strands in the years of work that I've had. So these are all women from, like I said, different castes and different religions and different subcultures, and there were times in the early years when I began the process of empowerment where they wouldn't even be able to talk to me properly, because they always had their heads covered with veils, they were always looking down, and the moment I would talk to them about even getting together, they would be very intimidated by the whole idea, because they felt that their husbands would disapprove and the opinion makers in the slums would disapprove. And that's because they were always given messages that their own intrinsic worth was not there. They always lived on the margins of the slum society. They had no voice really, neither at the family level nor at the community level. So they were not at all even accustomed to the whole idea of sitting together and perhaps looking at the community's problems and perhaps looking for solutions, even though they were the ones bearing the brunt of most of the problems, because if you have to fill water in a slum, it is the woman who will go with a bucket and stand in a queue and get that water. The husband will be off, in the morning to work. So it was really hard, and I went through a lot of difficulties establishing these groups, including death threats to my life, and things like my car tires being punctured and my windscreen being it's smashed and things like that. or I was even once locked into my own clinic and not allowed to go home, you know. So that's just to give you an idea of the extent of, you know, the threat and intimidation that is experienced when you're trying to overturn the status quo. Even though I had a very non-confrontational way of working and a non-violent way of working with the slum lords and all the other important opinion makers and powers in the slums, nevertheless, because it was so countercultural, I faced a lot of problems. Having said that, now our women have at this point in time, after 26 years, they have taken charge of what goes on in these communities, and the momentum has been built to such a wonderful extent that you know, they've cleaned up their slum. This is something that would have never happened had we not created a democracy in the slums. Never. I mean, the slums, there are government sweepers, but who's to hold them accountable? They don't, you know what they do? They sign their attendance in the municipal offices and they go and work privately and they get 2 salaries, you know, one from the municipal office and one from private work. So basically, I used to, in the beginning, personally used to take them with me to all the government offices, because I used to say, unless and until, you know, they go, you know, they're never going to ever have the confidence to do this. And they used to always shy away from the very idea. And by and by, as I went, you know, they would always want to stand or sit on the ground because they were unaccustomed to sitting on a chair. So those, and then the lifting of the veil was a huge issue, you know, to talk to an official, you know, that was a very major issue. And their husbands permitting them to go was another major issue, you know. So there were so many obstacles, you know, but we would take them always with us, and I also introduced them to the local legislators of the area in a very respectful manner, and tried to have the local legislators build bridges with them so that they could work with the women. And so as time went on, the women got more and more confident. You know, a little bit of success at the start helps a lot. You know, if there's even one tube well or one hand pump that they're successful in installing, all of a sudden their confidence levels go up and they think, oh, if I can do this. So you just go bit by bit. But you know, what I'm telling you has happened over a long time, you know, so but all through the 90s there was a lot of excitement, you know, as you can see here, what a dirty pond over there, and you know, then the women were very successful in working with the local councillor to be able to get clean water, you know, so the women used to take water from the dirty pond to wash their clothes, you know, because there wasn't any clean water at all. That's a toilet. So just even the whole idea that, you know, okay, you want to get the government to spend all this money on public toilets. Now, we also knew how much budget the government has for public toilets for slums. We had studied everything, and I also told everybody in the slums, look, this is the amount of money that's available for this. But the thing is that they like spending it because they always get something out of it, some kickback, like, you know, constructing a large toilet complex. But first of all, they use highly substandard material, and then after that, there's no one to really take responsibility for it. And so within a few months, this is the condition of the toilet. And so the women said, no, we are requesting you to give us a toilet, but we'll maintain it ourselves. So they've hired somebody to man the toilet, and the persons who are using it are paying money, a small amount of money, 1 rupee or something like that, to use it. And that's how they pay the salary of the cleaners and the main supervisors, and they run the toilet, and it's not ideal, but it's far, far cleaner than what was there before. They weren't even using these toilets. Some of course have individual ones, and in the mid-90s we had this wonderful drive, because by then we had thousands of women, you know, in the different Asha communities who had been, you know, transformed and who were leading this whole process from the front. So they legislated for electricity meters, and they were able to get those. And then when they got bolder and bolder, after all these initiatives, they decided to embark upon this whole land rights program. Because the bulldozer, as you see in this picture now, this is a picture that we took in 2006, where the Commonwealth Games were going to happen, and then all of a sudden the whole slum was bulldozed because they wanted that area for some urban renewal work. So there were very clear-cut laws in place about these things, but slum dwellers are always really, really scared about the bulldozer, and that's why the sense of temporariness prevents them greatly from progressing in life. So at their behest and at their request and at their insistence, we worked with the government of Delhi to do a land rights program, and you can see the before and after. The picture says everything. They gradually became lower middle class citizens wherever we did land rights. They got telephones, they got two-wheelers, they got, as you can see, carpets and TVs, and it was such a remarkable transformation that the Delhi government decided that it was time for the slum housing policy to be formulated, because there wasn't any. The policy was to basically relocate them, just take them away somewhere, that's it. But this project was a tremendous success. Now, of course, there were lots of elements that went into the project that ensured that it would be a success. But then subsequently, the policy very clearly stated which slums would be treated in this manner, which slums would be relocated to the periphery of the city, and which slums would be helped on an as-is, where-is basis. And by default, they were legal occupiers of the land, because the actual owners did not make any claims, for the past 30 or 35 years that they had been there. So this legislation took place in the 90s, subsequent to which there was so much enthusiasm in the country about the whole idea of slum housing that the Ministry of Urban Development approached me to ask whether we would be able to sit together and think about a national slum policy. So they used the Asha prototype for that, and then that was formulated around 1999. And it very, very clearly addresses the whole issue of land rights and the whole issue of slum housing, which is one of the cornerstones of slum development. It's, yes?
So when you get a legal title for your land in the slum, and I'm guessing that this is a bigger land area than before, then how do you address the problem of, because there's always a flow of new people who are coming in?
So the policy stated very clearly that to address exactly this issue, the policy stated that before 1990, if there was proof of residence, then they would be able to take advantage of this law. And if they came after 1990, they had no entitlements of any sort. So that was a measure to dissuade new people from coming into the city and staking a claim to land. That is something that they did. And at this point in time, it's really hard to find even an inch of space in Delhi where you can actually start occupying land and create a slum. Gone are those days,
But I think people are still going to come. So, means what the statistics show, lots of people migrate into Delhi.
Yeah.
So what about all these new people that are going to come? And so what's the best thinking there so far?
So basically, the recent trends are that they tend to migrate to smaller towns, not so much the city of Delhi. They might migrate, but they really find it hard to find their feet in a slum at this point in time. I mean, if you want to buy a slum hut, it's purchasable because it has value. I mean, if that slum hut needs to be demolished, then there are entitlements in lieu of that. So it has value. And so a slum hut in South Delhi might go for 40,000 or 50,000 rupees. A slum hut in some other remote part of Delhi might be a little cheaper. And if it's bigger, it will be a bit more expensive. So it has value. And so people who are coming from villages, if they have no cash, there's no way. Or they might rent a slum hut for like 200 rupees or something like that, or 300 rupees, so they pay a little bit of money to find a slum hut on rent. That's how they would manage. Or they would just go into the periphery like Noida and Gurgaon, areas like that, where they might try and find a place to stay. But certainly Delhi is very hard at this point in time.
What sort of proof were slum residents able to provide that showed that they had been living there?
They have two types of proof. One is the election card. So every resident has an election card and it's dated and everything with an address. And the other one is nowadays not used that commonly, but probably in your time they had a ration card. It's like a food subsidy card, where you can go to a food subsidy store, which a public ration store, and you can get rice and all the other grocery items at a highly subsidized rate because of your financial condition. So those are the two pieces of evidence, and they are very crucial if you need to prove that you Yes.
Do you think are there like statistics around like the homeless population in Delhi that kind of has increased side by side with?
So as of now, the pavement dwellers number around 200,000. That is the most recent figure I have. This does not include people living in night shelters. There's something called night shelters, and people live, these are government built shelters, and you can just, for 10 rupees or 20 rupees, you can just hire a little sleeping space, with a blanket, and people in large rows just sleep on the ground. So that doesn't include that number, but 200,000 roughly is the number of people living on the pavements of the city. So this project, this is the kitchen of the woman, and as you can see, the transformation is so remarkable that the United Nations invited us to apply for the best practices project that they have, and this slum housing project was then declared as the best practice by the United Nations, and then of course it acted as a prototype for the slum housing policy at the national level, which then helped 60,000 people just a few years later when the Commonwealth Games demolition took place. We had this policy to fall back on, and then of course as a result of that 60,000 people who would have otherwise got nothing were able to be relocated at another part of the city. The next strand of our work is financial inclusion, and this comes from the whole fact that slum dwellers by and large in the whole country have been financial untouchables forever. They've always been financially excluded from the banking services of our country. And of course, in rural areas you have NABARD and you have so many other agricultural and cooperative banks, you have farmers cooperatives, for animal husbandry, so many things, farmers loans. You must have heard of the 50,000 crore loan waiver that was sanctioned by Mr. Chidambaram to farmers because the Congress party wanted to become popular with the farmers of the, living in rural India. But there is no counterpart for, there was no counterpart for the urban poor. And they were primarily dependent on loan sharks, they were primarily dependent on just borrowing money from relatives or whoever, and they just kept their money in their homes. They didn't have any place where they could keep it safely. There was no concept of credit cards or anything like that. So then this is Mr. Chidambaram in this picture, and then the long and short of it is that I invited him to Asha, and he then invited me because he was very moved by the transformation that he saw in the Asha communities at every level, but wanted to make the whole thing financially, he wanted to introduce a financial inclusion program. So he requested 10 very large public sector banks to work with Asha to formulate a particular project for the urban poor, which meant making them bankable, what would be the kind of bank accounts that they would have, what would be the quantum of loan, what would be the purposes of the loan, what would be the rates of interest for them, would there be any rebates, there were all this discussion that went on, and he gave them 6 months to work with Asha to come up with a pilot. And this is him launching the scheme in the June of 2008, that same year. No, this is a later picture, but he launched it in June of 2008, the same year, and then suddenly there was this huge frenzy, and you can see how after the launch, the different banks started, setting up tables and chairs in the different slum areas and opening up bank accounts, whereas in the past they would have never even allowed a slum dweller to enter the bank, let alone open up an account. And then they started getting ATM cards, and all these women, with their veils over there, learning how to use ATM cards. It was very exciting. And then, of course, loans became available. I won't go into the details because we've already have talked for quite a bit, and I want to end. But the loans were available for all sorts of different activities. Along with the whole, yes, were you going to ask me a question?
Yeah. I was wondering if microfinance and micro insurance, those kind of initiatives have also been tried, and how's been the success?
So this is microfinance. The only difference is that this is basically microfinance being provided by the public sector banks of the country. the quantity of loan quantum of loan that is available is much higher than any other non-profit microfinance institution. Usually their quantums will range from 5,000 to 15,000. If you look at even the Grameen Bank model, it's a small amount of loan, and in Delhi such small loans don't do much, because you need a fairly sizable sum of money in order to for economic activity to make sense in the city of Delhi. So this scheme is a microfinance scheme, but every individual has a direct relationship with the bank. If they can prove to the bank that they are credit worthy, then their own relationship with the bank kicks in, and then Asha is not required anymore, which is exactly what we want, right? We want it to be sustainable relationship with banks, which is independent of any NGO, so that they can become financially inclusive.
But like things like self-help groups or like group lending, those kind of facts.
See, that was something that a lot of NGOs would do in the past, but here we are trying to get away from that, because we are saying here that when you're having a self-help group, what are you actually saying? You're saying that you can't trust individual slum dwellers.
Well, if you don't have a collateral, would a bank give them a loan?
Yeah, because it depends. Like for example, if this woman wants a loan for house building, she's got property papers, so she can keep them with the bank. If someone buys a motorcycle, they can deposit the papers of the vehicle with the bank. So yes, it's not that every single situation has a very clear collateral, but because the organization has worked with slum dwellers to create a situation where they have been primed to the extent that they are dependable and reliable, and also there's a lot of other things that go into it. I'm just skimming the surface, like there's training on financial accountability and financial discipline, and all those things. There's a lot of training that goes on to these, which bank officials themselves come and do. And because they are mandated to do it, there is a differential rate of interest scheme also, which gives you only 4%. At 4% interest, 15,000, there the banks are willing to literally give it as a free gift, so that they can show in their books that they've been able to do the DRI loans. And here we are constantly saying, no, we don't want any free gifts, because our primary focus is on ensuring that every single human being acts as a good citizen, and we are building citizenship here. We are building democracy here. So no free gifts. And the repayment rate has been 99%. It's remarkable. So after all this happened, then banks started rolling it out. There were so many other NGOs in Delhi, Mumbai, so many places where they felt that this is wonderful. Those who are working in slums, they can go directly. NGOs can go, or they can go on their own, but they have to be able to demonstrate that they are trustworthy.
Sorry, if you're running out of time.
Yes, that's why I'm saying.
Let's continue on, and I think we'll have opportunity after the talk to ask questions too.
So basically the education program is what I want to touch upon. Now this is exactly the way I saw children when I entered in 1988. This is a child right inside the garbage, and you can see he's got a little plastic bag in his right hand, and what he's trying to do is rummaging for bits of metal and plastic in this garbage. And I used to see these kind of children every day, all the time. And if they weren't doing this, then they were polishing shoes, or they were just selling newspapers at traffic lights, or working in roadside stalls, cleaning utensils. You must have seen all this, when you're in big cities in India. It's a very common sight. And so without going into all the details, it was the community that decided, we've had enough of this. We are going to now start sending our children to school. Now it was all because of the empowerment processes that had already gathered such a lot of momentum, that the community itself came to the decision that they didn't want any more of this child labor, and they wanted to send their kids to school. And so all these women and the men and various volunteers in the community started approaching all the state schools in the area, forming pressure groups and working with the school authorities to get these kids admitted to school. And then Asha, of course, then established computer labs and English teaching and so on, to complement and supplement the education that was already being provided by the state schools, which had a lot of gaps, and it was necessary to fill those gaps in order for the children to be able to express their best potential to the finest degree, and prepare them for the national level examination. So literally thousands of children. If we had a school of our own, how many could we have kept? Just a few hundred. But here we were using the state system, which was quite good, and the Kendriya Vidyalayas and all these Sarojini Nagar number 1 and Moti Bagh number 2 and all these schools, they're very good. I mean, some of them may not be as good as others, but on the whole, I mean, there's an excellent system there, and so we felt it was important for us to be able to build those bridges. And these kids, there was so much enthusiasm in the communities because the kids were going to school. It was remarkable, and going up to secondary school. And since Mr. Chidambaram's blessings meant that all of a sudden these banks were desperate to give out loans and were, literally setting targets and saying, oh, can we have like 1,000 loans by, December, or, can we have 5,000 loans by March, or, whatever. There was no difficulty with getting bank loans, essentially. The difficulties just vanished because of the way in which it all turned out. So we started encouraging our slum children to think about the whole possibility of university, which again opened up. So we sent the first cohort of slum children, and we've done quite a lot of research on this, and we've done research. Governments have also been able to feed in information. Various other organizations have been able to feed in information. If we are talking about slums in India, this is the very first such program where we've been able to send 1,100 kids from slum communities into tertiary education, at a university such as Delhi University. And really, it is a tribute to the triumph of the human spirit, I think. And of course, it has meant that we've done a lot to make it happen. From counseling the parents to encouraging the children with resources, giving them all the resources they could possibly need to do well. So it's been a very long and arduous journey, actually getting into university, but it's just been wonderful. And again, we felt, okay, scaling up is important. Here we go again, scaling up. So we called the Education Minister of India, to an event so that he could understand what was going on. And you see him right here, giving out scholarships to these wonderful kids while their parents looked on. And it was amazing, the parents, the fathers of these daughters had tears in their eyes. They couldn't believe that, oh my goodness, my daughter is receiving a scholarship from the Education Minister of India. She's a slum child and today she's going to study at a university. I mean, it's too emotional also sometimes for a parent to even imagine that their children could ever dare to even become like this. So there was a wonderful revolution, and we had so many kids, going to university. And the whole news spread like wildfire in the city that, there are these kids who are going, and I started getting requests from everyone. They wanted to come and see what's going on. So here you see that all the embassies and high commissions, big corporates in Delhi started joining hands, big Australian companies, banks, British companies, the American ambassador, who's now of course gone, and but Nancy Powell, she was there. So all of these people got so excited by this initiative that they just wanted to do their very best for these kids. So they started opening their doors. The person you see here is the British High Commissioner to India, Sir James Bevan. And under his own leadership, these kids are learning skills in the workplace. Similarly, you see over there.
I mean, the nature thing is people get excited, and things happen for a short time, but then it goes out of attention and it fades away. So I'm curious in terms of how is it continuing on, the momentum after the big splashes go away?
I think, well, so far we haven't experienced it because, we launched this in 2008, and at that time we hardly had a very tiny group go, and year on year the excitement levels have gone on building. So basically the various stakeholders in the city, because it's a relatively new program, have taken great notice of it. But obviously I do understand that the excitement and the enthusiasm has to continue to stay maintained, and that will stem from the leadership, that will stem from the way in which you can empower others, that will stem from how you can decentralize, that will stem from.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was thinking. Eventually it's the community and the empowerment where they themselves feel, because the external things will decrease over.
They'll all go away.
And the critical mass.
Yeah. So there are two things here, which is you made a very very important and very exciting point actually. We got launched this thing called the Asha Ambassadors Program, where students who are bright, who are brilliant, who are very highly motivated, who are committed to their communities, who really want to give back. Of course, almost all of them do, but we choose on certain basis of certain criteria, and then they take on the responsibility of this whole program. And so we've already been training them. Like this year we had a host of admissions and most of the work was done by the volunteer students themselves. The other thing I've forgotten what it was, something else that was in my mind, but it'll probably come back. It was something to do with sustainability, but I'll come back to it when I remember. So, and then of course, the next step is employment, so it's, we've got this wonderful relationship with a whole lot of different companies, and the whole idea is that, we don't go to the companies such as Pepsi or such as any other one or even yours and say that, we want your money. What we would say is, we want a relationship. And we see that relationship as having many different elements to it. So somebody who interned at Pepsi is now good enough and Pepsi wants to hire them. Well, that's wonderful. Now what happens is that all the other companies get highly motivated and they also begin to look for students whom they wish to hire. And then company employees start visiting Asha. There's a culture of philanthropy that becomes even stronger in the company. There's a sense of pride in the company employees that they've actually spent individual time with students, helping them with their resumes, helping them with their CVs, helping them mentor them, helping them to get jobs. So it just brings in such a wonderful element into the company culture that there is a high level of excitement in the company environment also. So what I'm saying to the companies in India is also that let this be a two-way process. And in the beginning, I didn't even ask them for any money. And they themselves came up. Like Macquarie Bank said, oh, we have a foundation. Did you know that? I said, no, I wasn't aware. They said, well, since we know you so well, and since we work together so well, we want you to apply to our foundation. So just giving you an example of how the two-way process works wonders in terms of being able to add so much value both to people living in the communities as well as to the company. And I've seen the same thing happen with the government, that two-way process, because it's very easy, government hates this sermonizing approach that NGOs can sometimes have, this is what I've done and so, you ought to be doing this as your policy. But when they work so closely with you and when they've done things with you and when they are active participants in the success, then they really get very excited and then they want to talk to you more about how policy can be formulated because they worked very closely. Then I'm just quickly going to talk about the educative approaches. So the idea is to replicate in many different ways through diffusion. So I call this replication by diffusion, where I can, when I lecture regularly at various universities in the United States, so that's of course Australia, University of Melbourne, that's Harvard School of Public Health, and I am constantly lecturing at Columbia and lots of different places. And we also have lots of classes that these schools of public health and other schools like to have as part, Asha as part of their curriculum, and they send students for practicums and so on. So there is quite a strong emphasis on the educative approaches so that this model can be widely available for people all over the world. That's just a quick glimpse of the relationships with the United States that have been there for the past many years. As you can see, Jim McDermott and I have been friends for a long time, but somehow I never got to Seattle before this, and and I've really had a wonderful week out here that I shall never forget. Thanks to KK and Rajshri who introduced me to such fine people as Anup and so many others here. And then, of course, this is Congressman Mike Thompson, and he represents Napa Valley. So we've had fundraisers in Washington, D.C. Dick Gephardt, Nancy Pelosi did a fundraiser for us in a restaurant called Bombay Palace, I think it's called. Have you heard of Bombay Palace?
Right next to White House.
Is it near White House? I don't remember now, but it was in 2002, and then there was all these different congressmen whom they invited, and they raised $100,000. I still remember that. So this is, and then this. So Asha USA is a separately registered entity with a 501c3 status, and this is Professor David Hempton. He is the professor. He's a professor, the dean of Harvard Divinity School, and he and his wife together on a completely voluntary basis, along with a lot of other trustees, run Asha USA out of the Harvard campus. Just to give you a quick glimpse of the international interest in the Asha model as well as the national interest. So obviously when parties keep switching, as you know, and it's very important for us to be seen as neutral. It's also very important for us to have the world's tallest leaders come into slums, because you can sit at a distance and go on reading all the documents till you go blue in the face, but it doesn't really happen unless you actually walk into a slum, touch and feel it, sense it, and be able to understand what transformation and change is all about. And that's my aim and goal as part of the whole replication by diffusion strategy, to constantly expose people to slum transformation. That's John Key, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he came and also had a wonderful, wonderful time at Asha, and then he took back the message. That's Julia Gillard. She's the she was, as you know, the Australian Prime Minister. She just has been replaced by Tony Abbott in the past 8 months or so. And actually, she was so excited about this model, she invited me to Australia, and they have huge problems with the Aboriginal communities over there. And she was very interested in the principles and the strategies that Asha uses, because they also felt that they were putting in a lot of Australian dollars into the problem, and they were not really seeing major solutions. And today is the 2nd of October, so I'm going to end my talk because it talks about, we have this wonderful birthday of Mahatma Gandhi that we are celebrating today. And I was greatly influenced by Mahatma Gandhi even growing up, and I continue to this day. And we have a whole lot of different values that underpin all this work that you've heard about. Non-violence is one of the very important values, and that certainly comes from the message of Gandhiji. So in my approach, I would say that whether it be a ruthless slumlord, whether it be a very apathetic bureaucrat, whether there be a lot of complex machinery around the systems and structures, whether it be well-to-do neighbors who are unsympathetic towards slum dwellers, whether it be people from the slums themselves, who are part of a feudal structure and who are not interested in change. There could be so many stakeholders and so many other groups and individuals whose cooperation and support is important to enlist if one wants slum development. If one wants to offer a palliative, if one wants to offer a small service, you don't need anyone's help, maybe. But if you really want to bring about radical transformation, then the only way is to work with all these people. And I've found peacemaking and non-violence to be an absolutely wonderful approach. It has never failed me. Even the most difficult of people I've been able to win over. I find that it is a very highly effective method of building bridges and being able to create and foster goodwill, to create an environment of inspiration and motivation, an environment of great enthusiasm where nobody is an enemy. I have got rid of the word enemy. I call them opponents. I don't call them enemies, because they have a different viewpoint, and it's important to understand where they're coming from. And I've also noticed that when your opponent understands you better, then he also or she is willing to build bridges and move from their original position.
So how are you able to work with slumlords? I would think they would be very much against the empowerment that you're offering.
Yeah, so again, I always try to understand what makes a slumlord who he is. What is his history? With what lens is he viewing the slum? Why is he behaving the way he's behaving? And so I call it a separation from of the antagonism from the antagonist. And I say that I don't have any problem with the slumlord per se. I have a problem with his deeds. And therefore, I would sit down with the slumlord and I would try to reason with the slumlord, and so that he doesn't feel threatened. He doesn't feel as though all his power is going to be snatched away from him in an instant. And the idea is to befriend him and to include him in the development process rather than marginalize him. So I found that the slumlords are extremely receptive. In fact, I have seen that no one has ever said a single kind word to a slumlord. They've always been used and feared, but they've never been spoken to with compassion. They've never been spoken to with acceptance. They've never been spoken to in a non-judgmental way. And it's a very powerful tool to be able to speak to somebody in a non-judgmental way, so that they can then open up and experience the comfort of being able to create, where there's a space that's created between you and the person can then say what they feel without fear. So there have been lots of different strategies, and so I'm not going to, go into, but this is just to say that again, like, I'm here at Microsoft, and I don't, of course, we all need resources to do our work, and the aim of Asha is to reach out to hundreds of thousands of kids and be able to create a critical mass and produce a higher education movement. And Delhi being the capital of India, we think there are many great opportunities under the current leadership to be able to do a lot with what we are doing. But at the same time, we wish to give back to the Microsoft volunteers. So should you wish to come to Asha, there are opportunities for you to teach English, as you can see here. There are opportunities for you to work in the computer labs, or do building work, get your hands dirty. There are so many things you can do. And even if you don't wish to volunteer, you could just come and visit. You could just come for a day or half a day and just see what's going on, and maybe it'll change your perspective. I can make you the offer of bringing your families to interact and meet with these wonderful people and hear the stories firsthand. And therefore, I very much see this as a two-way relationship, and the doors of Asha and the doors of Delhi will always be open. Now this is just quickly talking about the matching program. I think Anup, you will probably be able to explain it even better, but it's been registered on the Microsoft.
What I said in the beginning would suffice for most Microsoft teams. They know how to go to Give Now and locate Asha India. So let's thank Dr. Kiran so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Here we have Rohit Patel. His father was the appointment secretary for Mahatma Gandhi, and he wants to say a few words to us. And so we should end in the next 5 minutes. So please, if you hold on, and then we can take it from there.
It's tough to follow the act of Kiranji, but I will, at least I'm inspired just as much by her as Mahatma Gandhi. And it's really Gandhi's work in action that I've noticed. So I'll talk very briefly about a couple things. First, how I got in touch with Mahatmaji's work and all that. My father, when he was 17, grew up in a small town in Gujarat called Bhadran. He was it was new wave in the teens. Gandhi had come and established an ashram in 1915. He was just probably 6 years old then, and then next 10 years, he was growing up in the enthusiasm and to change the society and help India and all that. And suddenly his father must have asked him if he met a father, another friend, and he has a daughter, and they agreed to get the two married. And so he was facing a dilemma of a very, very major level. And so he ultimately said no. And grandfather being what he was, he said, then you realize the consequences. He says, if you don't marry, you can't live here. I'll disown you. You'll not have a penny in your pocket. And father was adamant, so he walked from his ancestral home, and then one thing led to another, and an uncle then advised him to go join the Sabarmati ashram. And that was in 1926-27. And there, of course, Bapu had just invited all young people to come and join and work towards, learn about nonviolence, become satyagrahis, train, just like Martin Luther King had done here during civil rights movement, and come and live with him. And so he did, and there he was given the responsibility of fetching water from Sabarmati for the whole camp. So he'll get up at 3:30 in the morning, get ready. 4 o'clock he would start with a couple buckets on a staff, go down all the way to Sabarmati, which didn't have much water in those years. He would walk up, dump the buckets in a tank and go back again for 8 hours straight. Then he would clean up and get ready, get some rest, get some lunch, and then he would go to a library of Kaka Sahib Kalelkar, who lived at the ashram too, and read. And this was noticed by Kaka Sahib, and so he brought this young man under his wings and made him his personal assistant. And he was known in the ashramites as Kaka no Amo. Ambalal was his name. And so that's how he came to be Kaka Sahib's secretary. And whenever Kaka Sahib was meeting with Bapu, then he would sit outside as an appointment secretary. And let me just show you a couple slides. This will give you a visibility into Gandhi's, how he related to the lowest level individual. This is a letter to my father. It says, Chiranjeev Ambalal, Tamaro Kagal Maryo, etc. Received your letter. Why did you allow yourself to get sick? I mean, he is in jail. Bapu is in jail. Bapuji, my father, had written this some letter and sent him some newsletters. So he says, why did you allow yourself to get sick? Now you must be better. Don't send the newsletter in the mail. My father must have felt as a 20-year-old very clever that he is getting news in personal letter to Bapu, so he can know what's going on. But on the other hand, Bapu reprimanded him, saying, why do you don't send it? What would I do with all this news sitting in jail? And then he says, that we are satyagrahis. We insist on truth, and we don't give up our commitment to it. So even if we know it's easy to violate the rule, we don't do that. He says, I accepted the prison's rules, otherwise Britain couldn't run British government could not run the prisons. And I have willingly accepted that, so I would live by those rules, so don't send it. And if you are not familiar with the rule, go meet somebody else and get that. And that's all very succinct. Here is my favorite letter after that. This is to Kaka Sahib. That it again shows the character of Gandhi as a leader. It says, Chiranjeev Kaka, your letter I kept for the last. It's 8:30 in night, and somebody, one of Pyaralalji, one of the inner circle people, is also sitting here counting my threads of cotton that he had spun that day, and so on. And then he says, when it must be Bapu was still in the prison, and Kaka Sahib was in the prison but had just been released. So he says, your tears at the time of departure became contagious. So he must have gotten some wet eyes too. And he says, how can I repay your beautiful service all this time? And so he says, we'll name, and I'm just getting the fragrance of your service every step I walk. And then he says, we'll certain day we'll call it a day of service in your honor. I mean, this is the character of a true leader who so tenderly and lovingly conveys his appreciation to his subordinates and people who work with him. And I felt that is so important. We are so lucky to have this kind of legacy in our family. And here is another benefit of being a appointment secretary. This is a card that Christmas card Rabindranath Tagore himself sketched and sent to Mahatma Gandhi, to Mahatma Ji, my namaskar, Rabindranath Tagore, Shanti Niketan, Founders Day, 22nd December 1929. And then it says, my salutation is to him who knows me imperfect and loves me. What a beautiful thing. And Bapu never kept anything, aparigraha, total non-possession. So he must have discarded, responded and discarded, and my father got it, and it has been in the family. And I'm going to send an exact replica of it to Shanti Niketan, because it should belong there actually, it's a national treasure. So anyway, and this shows where the dialogue between two great personalities too. Rabindranath Ji and Mahatma Ji, they actually were at loggerheads, where Rabindranath did not want Mahatma Ji to bring religion into the public life. He was against that, and he believed in one world, not a nation. He was against nationhoods and so on. And so but they both respected each other and had a public dialogue. There is a wonderful book of their letters and dialogues that I have. Here is the great man. So let me conclude with a few thoughts. I was asked once to give a lecture right after on Gandhi Jayanti, just like this, right after 9/11. And I asked myself a question, how can I talk about nonviolence in the shadow of World Trade Center being bombed? And same issue today is ISIS. And how can we think about nonviolence in this kind of thing? But then again, we have to think, because these are the times where nonviolence really shows the way. In the speech I had given, I'll share some few thoughts as I close. Can nonviolence prevent future events like World Trade Center? Or can it dissuade bin Laden? Probably not. But that doesn't mean the opposite, that we should go after violence violently. Violence begets violence, that we know. So what was Gandhi's core message? He says, truth is the foundation, truth is the goal, non-violence is the means. Willingness to take on suffering is the hidden doorway to or path. An indomitable will, the soul force, evoking the God in the heart of an evildoer, is what drives you. So that's what we should do. And I extracted these principles from him, his writings, that my appeal is refrain from demonizing the enemy on both sides. Just as Kiranji said, separate the doer from the deed. So that evil deed doesn't mean the doer is evil. To the public, ask for a sustained effort to eradicate terrorism, but not revenge. To Islamic voice of moderation, speak out and denounce efforts to turn every political issue into a jihad. And to ourselves, develop strength to move from violence to non-violence. Accept suffering as a legitimate way, and to our children, have the faith in non-violence. Separate the deed from the doer, because violence only begets violence. And we can see proof of it throughout. There is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt has quoted, people try nonviolence for a week, and when it doesn't work, they go back to violence, which hasn't worked for centuries. So on that, I'll end. I thank Kiranji for coming into my life. She has really, I accidentally met her, and I saw her work, and I said, here I have found somebody who has actually put all these principles, compassion of Buddha, love of Christ, Gandhi's nonviolence, Martin Luther King's social justice, and Mandela's forgiveness, all these she has rolled into one and shown how to change 500,000 lives. And I'm asking the question now, how do we scale it up to 5 million in 5 years or 100 million in 10? So that's the challenge I've taken on, and thank you for coming into my life.
Okay, now, thank you to Dr. Patel and Dr. Kiran Martin. I think it's been a pretty unusual talk for our community, but I hope many of you have found it inspiring. And, so thank you so much.
Thank you.